Meet the most capable CR-V Honda has ever dreamed of. The all-new CR-V Trail Sport Hybrid. With all-terrain tires and available enhanced traction control, it's built for wherever the day takes you. Heated front seats and a heated steering wheel? Ideal for winter drives and crisp early starts. And with generous cargo space, it's ready for big gear and even bigger getaways. The CR-V Trail Sport Hybrid. Learn more at honda.com/CRV.
Versed is guys wear that guys wear. The modern man's clothing brand that makes you feel good to be a guy. Whether you're dropping controversial hot takes in the group chat or trying not to pull a hammy in a pickup game, Versed keeps you cool and comfortable in any situation. That's VRST. Versed. Shop guys wear now only at Dick's.
How accessible do you think financial services are? For many people with a disability, the answer is not that accessible. I'm Benjamin Ensor from 11FS, and on today's FinTech Insider Insights, we're taking a closer look at accessibility and how we can make financial services more inclusive. Over 1.5 million people in the UK alone experience some form of learning disability. But accessible banking is a global imperative. Not all disabilities are visible, and disabilities encompass a broad spectrum of challenges faced by people. Some include difficulties at accessing technologies, cognitive impairments, or increased susceptibility to fraudsters and scammers. In this special episode, we're joined by Project Nemo, an organisation working to highlight accessibility challenges from across financial services and bring together the tools of fintech to help solve some of these problems. So what exactly is Project Nemo? And what does it mean when we say we should be more Nemo? Let's find out. I'd like to introduce 3 guests. First of all, we have a very welcome return to FinTech Insider for Joanne Dewar, co-founder of Project Nemo. Welcome back, Joanne. You're obviously well known to many people in FinTech from your previous roles, but perhaps you can tell us a little bit about your role in founding Project Nemo and how it came to be.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for the welcome and opportunity. I've been in the fintech space for over a decade. I've been on this show a few times now, and established Project Nemo a year ago, having come to realise that whilst we've been busy making payments faster, more streamlined, more secure, lots of different things, have we really been thinking about making payments more accessible? And in fact, in addressing some of those other improvements, have we inadvertently forgotten accessibility? So Project Nemo generally was about the accessibility both from a customer perspective and disability inclusion, which I also felt had been left behind within the diversity inclusion discussion. And Project Nemo has been looking to address the accessibility of all of our products and services. This particular project is a focus on learning disabilities, which is a subset of the wider disability inclusion conversation, and we'll come on to that in a moment.
Fabulous. Thank you. We also have a FinTech Insider debut for Hannah Darley, Senior Director of Strategy at CINT. Hannah, it would be great if you could tell us a little bit about CINT and about your role there.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. So CINT is a technology transformation and acceleration partner. And as Senior Director of Strategy, I lead transformation and growth for global clients across sectors, including financial services, healthcare and energy. And my work centres on driving innovation and ensuring that technology-led change is balanced with human-centred design. So organisations have great business impact, but also deliver great customer experiences. And with Project Nemo, we've been privileged to co-create a prototype of a money management app with people with learning disabilities and their carers. And our goal really in this project was to show what's possible when you put lived experience at the heart of design.
It's a shame the podcast is audio because it's harder to show people a demo, but it sounds fantastic. And I hope everyone listening to this gets a chance to see it as well as hear about it at some point. And we also have a FinTech Insider debut for Catherine Townsend, who is the UK Government Disability and Access Ambassador for the banking sector. And also is Head of Customer Vulnerability, Access and Inclusion at Nationwide Build Society here in the UK. Fantastic to have you with us too, Catherine. Can you tell us a little bit about your ambassador role, your day job, and how you came to be involved with Project Nemo?
I have been a disability inclusion advocate for as long as I can remember, but it became a profession after working in the branch design team, actually back at Barclays around 15 years ago. And over the years, that turned into Head of Customer Vulnerability and Accessibility. And now I'm delighted to do that at Nationwide, where I've been for the last 3 years. My role as Government Disability and Access Ambassador for the banking sector has been a fantastic experience. A lot of people don't know what these roles are, so I'll just explain briefly. The UK government has 20 different government disability ambassadors for different sectors, from rail and retail to tourism and banking and insurance. These are leaders in their industry who can help drive disability inclusion through their networks and their experience and their change programs, really. And so I've been doing that for nearly 4 years now. I'm just coming to the end of my time in that role. And actually, that's how I became sort of connected with Joe, really. I've been determined through that role to turn the dial on deaf inclusion and inclusion of people with a learning disability. And that's how Joe and I joined forces. Last October, so October 24, Nationwide won the inaugural Disability Inclusion Award at the Pay 360 Awards, which Joe had been pivotal in launching. We met up shortly afterwards and realised that we both had a passion on learning disability. And within 2 months, we were hosting the December Roundtable, which kickstarted this whole wonderful affair.
Wow. If only every meeting was that productive. All right. Well, let's dive in to the new Safe Spending for Adults with a Learning Disability report that Project Nemo has just been published. And I recommend to our listeners that you read it. In saying that, I'm conscious that some of our listeners are people with dyslexia who deliberately prefer listening to things to reading. So I don't know if there's actually an audio version, but there's plenty of graphics and visuals in there. Joe, could you perhaps tell us a little bit more about how the report came about? But could you also just clarify the difference between a learning difficulty like dyslexia and a learning disability, just for those of our listeners who are maybe not familiar with the distinction?
Yeah, so certainly. So we decided to work specifically with MenCap and their definitions of learning disability, of which there are 1.5 million people in the UK. And, including their family members, that becomes 6 million people in itself who are, closely associated with this, particular community. You're right, it is distinct from learning difficulties or wider neurodiverse experiences. So it's specifically about learning disabilities as defined by MenCap.
Thank you. Kat, perhaps you can tell us a little bit about the research process. Obviously, as Director of Research, I'm a bit of a research nerd. You have to be quite thoughtful when you approach sort of more vulnerable communities. Can you tell us a little bit about the research that was done for this, please?
Yeah, sure. So whilst Joe and I co-chaired the December Roundtable at Nationwide last year, that identified that we needed certain action in certain spaces. And that's how we spun up particular work streams. And one of those work streams was new research and insights. And then we have another tech work stream, which we'll come on to later, which sort of shows the other side of it. But it was clear that the industry wanted a clear steer on what to think about, what to do. And Joe and I are quite impatient. We didn't want to have to wait for every banking provider in the UK to go off and do their own research. So Nationwide put their hand up and said, we'll do it. We'd love to do it, in fact. Disability inclusion is key to our strategy at Nationwide as a modern mutual to be fairer, more inclusive, a banking provider. So it's a really great fit for us to create this open source content, not just that we can learn from that, but the whole industry can learn from that. And so we worked with Firefish, an independent research agency, to do the work for us, obviously maintaining that professionalism and that independent nature that's really important to thorough research. And they conducted qualitative phase. So they held 15 in-depth paired interviews with people with learning disability and their trusted supporters for 90 minutes, really getting into this under the skin of what was important to them. And then they backed up those findings with a quant phase. So they went out to 300 more individuals with a learning disability online to engage them and validate the qualitative stage. And they also did a wider piece looking at other vulnerable groups to sort of peer assess some of the findings for the learning disability category.
Thank you. Hannah, let's bring you in a little bit on this. What are some of the sort of most common challenges that people with learning disabilities have when they're trying to access financial services? Perhaps you can sort of summarize some of the highlights of the report for listeners who haven't had a chance to read it yet. What are some of the big difficulties that people with learning disabilities have trying to access financial services, and why does that matter?
I think what really stood out for me in the research was just how many people with learning disabilities and their carers are forced to rely on unsafe workarounds. So they're sharing passwords, they're sharing cards, or using children's accounts just to access basic banking. And, this is everyday payments that they're wanting to make. It's making their life very, very hard on a daily basis. And ultimately, those workarounds just aren't safe and they leave them unprotected.
What's forcing people into these workarounds? I mean, something like a children's account, I presume that's because it offers their carer or some other relative or someone else in their life an opportunity to sort of see what's in the account and sort of maybe help them in some way. But it sounds like it's kind of the wrong product for it. Joe or Hannah, one of you, what's pushing people into these sort of unsafe practices? Why are they having to find workarounds?
If I describe a scenario and an example that helps bring this situation to life, if a young adult with learning disabilities has £5 in their pockets and they're going to the shops to buy a can of Coke, the worst that's going to happen is that they will lose that £5 note. Whether it's through spending £5 when it was meant to be £1.20, whether it's something that else that happens along the route, whether it was initiated by them or initiated by somebody else. Once you translate to being digital payments in a digital world, and we know that the move away from cash is unrelenting, whatever we think. It was 61% of transactions in 2008 were cash, and now it's 12%. So there's a absolute drop in use of cash. And so if somebody is having to use a card for a payment, the same can of Coke from the same shop, then whose card is it, and what might happen? What else could happen with that card? What's the balance on the card? What transactions could happen? Who is looking after that balance? How can we help that individual make that transaction safely? And very often, the banks absolutely want to help individuals, but there is a very broad spectrum of capability. There's a very broad spectrum of need. And what we know full well is that there are, in most scenarios, there are parents and carers who know what precisely would be the best way of supporting that individual live their life, complete transactions as independently as that individual can and should. And so what we've been trying to explore is, right, but what is the provision that's needed in order to enable that to happen? Kat, you've got experience supporting customers all the time.
It's a real sort of varied picture, because it goes back to the fact that not everybody is the same, even if they have the same impairment or the same access needs. There's a huge variety of needs. But banks haven't traditionally always thought about this community. We know, Joe and I have, experienced the fact that within disability conversations, the learning disability part of that was absent. And so actually that's in accessibility conversations around the banking table. I think this is why we wanted to do the report. We needed to really advocate and amplify the needs of these users for the first time, because it's really been absent so far.
It's a big proportion of the population, isn't it? Because 1.4 million people in the UK's population of 70 odd million. I mean, that's 1 in 100 people. And then to your point, Joe, of course, they're all their families and so on. So it's a chunk, and presumably it's very much the same in other countries around the world. I presume that disabilities are sort of fairly evenly distributed around the world. One of the other challenges, so you talked, Joe, very eloquently about the problem with cash and the replacement with sort of digital cash, electronic money, or whatever we want to call it, cards. In a sense, there's an element here of digital technologies have actually potentially made things worse for this group of users in the short term, even as they've sort of made them better for many other people. Hannah, is that a fair summary? That in the short term, actually digital technologies sort of made some things worse?
Yeah, I think we love innovation and we love shiny new features in fintech. And actually, these kind of rapid innovation, it has a really the impact on people with learning disabilities can be really disarming. And if an app changes overnight, suddenly they've got to relearn everything and their day is literally turned upside down. So whilst innovation's great, these rapid changes can have a really negative impact on people with learning disabilities who like stability, they like routine.
I think to add to that, it's not just the cash. We've got a huge move to unattended terminals. And with an unattended terminal, you haven't got a cashier or a shopkeeper there right on hand to help somebody manage the process should they become stuck. So at multiple stages, we're taking out the human in the loop. And so often the human in the loop is the bridge between that enables a wider cross-section of the population to be able to make payments and to interact with the world, because they're able to just, without any form of sort of process or training, you can just naturally see when somebody's struggling and lean in to help, because that's what being human is. And part of the problem with the move to digital everything is that, that's fine if you're if it's been designed with your abilities, capabilities, and needs in mind. But what's been fundamental that we found with this learning disabilities community, they have never been at the design table to be able to share what they would like as a community until this moment. And one of the beautiful things as to what we've learned in this process is there's been incredible ideation and innovation and creativity that's brought ideas that I think we'd all benefit from. And I'm saying that as somebody who has been at the point of helping bring no end of different fintech products and services to life.
Joe, I'm so pleased that you've raised that part about the human, because it's so important. At Nationwide, it's core to our strategy to have a branch present alongside technology. But in the research, we found that individuals, they want a fully accessible digital solution, but one that can connect to a human if you need that support. That's so telling. Who doesn't want to be able to reach out and say, I've got stuck, or I need help, or this is complicated, or I don't know what I'm doing, and have that, be able to raise that red flag if they need to. So it's really important. You've got to have that human at the heart of it, not just for the human that you're designing for, but the humans who can support those individuals as well.
There's a couple of really poignant sort of passages in the report where you've quoted directly from some of these users, where they're just saying things like, "Oh, the man just wouldn't help me," or they just tried to fob me off onto a machine, and the sort of almost dread of a machine, which raises up, I suppose, two questions. So one question is, with the sort of rapid advancement of artificial intelligence and so on, does that help or does that make the problem worse? Because you potentially get, AI machines that simply don't recognize those human signs that maybe all of us as individuals recognize. This is a person who's struggling here, but a machine would just carry on just doing its machine kind of thing. Do we think this problem could get worse not this problem. These challenges could actually get worse for people because AI is just going to make the world more confusing and harder to deal with.
I'm sure Joe will have a view on this, but just to say, first of all, I think you've got two things. You've got one, which is the topic of conversation. Our AI across the industry needs to be smart enough to understand when somebody needs to be connected to a human. But what if you can't actually access your app directly because Face ID doesn't work for you or voice authenticator doesn't work for you? Joe's got direct examples of people she's been working through for whom this is a real challenge. Joe, do you want to add anything there?
Totally agree. It's built on that. Actually, we're not a sort of just the middle third of the population. Everybody's like that and needs those features and functionality. We have a full society that needs to be able to interact with the world. And we cannot think that we progress as society by thinking, right, it's okay, we'll build solutions that work for the 80% and the 20% on the edges. They'll just have to manage with cash or they'll just have to do something else. We need to build solutions and this is why it's so exciting having had these events just as we're coming into the new national payments vision, the new financial inclusion strategy, actually putting the needs of some of these often forgotten marginalized user groups who are, often considered, we'll come back to that later. It's a little bit hard. It's a little bit complicated. Actually bring those users' voices and needs front and center. And if we can solve for their needs, actually, we all benefit from a number of these ideas and features and functionality.
Thank you.
Yeah, Joe, I was just going to add that AI can absolutely help us personalize experience and make things more accessible, but it's not a silver bullet on its own. And the magic happens when you have AI, human insight, and lived experience all together.
I just want to wrap up this section with one last quick subject. Joe, you touched on it briefly, or I think actually it was Kathleen, you touched on it, about the difficulty sometimes people have using biometrics or other forms of security. And we've talked about how people often just want help from other people. And of course, the vast majority of people are wonderful and helpful and kind. But there are people out there who are not wonderful or kind or helpful. And, there are fraudsters and others. My understanding is that people with learning difficulties are a little bit more susceptible to fraudsters and scammers than the rest of us, though the rest of us are plenty susceptible as it is. How big an issue is that? Is that something that sort of came through in the research as well? I'm not really sure how I'm throwing that to maybe Kat.
There's probably a few factors to consider here. I think sadly, strangers or friends, and I use the word friend in inverted commas, do sometimes take advantage of trusting individuals. And indeed, Project Nemo's own co-founder, Chris Foster, talks openly about the time that he experienced this horrific form of abuse. Then there are the ways that individuals are forced to compromise their own security due to inaccessible systems. This is where banks and fintechs really need to lean into the research and understand what they can be doing. So, for example, high likelihood for these individuals of writing down PINs, passcodes, and sharing them because they're trying to bypass inaccessible systems, whereby PIN entry just might not have been built for these users and isn't very accessible. So things like biometrics are key. And I think it's no surprise that the research found that 80% of users praised Apple and Google Pay for making payments easy for probably just this reason. But you have to make sure that that biometrics journey is built accessibly. And Project Nemo itself has found case studies of people with facial difference, for example, who are unable to use Face ID, or for people who can't speak or use sign language and are asked to speak to authenticate. And CINT's own demo found a lovely piece of functionality about PINs and that use case. So I don't know, Hannah, if you want to build on.
Yeah, we made it really accessible to be able to access your PIN in the app, but also in those moments where the user does freeze, the trusted third person can actually trigger PIN reveal. So the trusted third person does not see the PIN, but they can trigger it to display on the user's phone when they're in a moment of anxiety or crisis and just need to get the answer.
If I can just build on that as well. We know from the activity that's happening in the counter fraud space. We all know as consumers, fraudsters are getting increasingly sophisticated, and it's a whole enterprise in its own right. No longer are you just receiving emails about this Nigerian prince that's inherited $10 billion dollars or whatever. They're increasingly hard to spot, and the danger is that those individuals that have digital signatures, any signs of vulnerability will be picked up by fraudsters, and they'll double down on targeting those individuals. So we absolutely need to be mindful on ourselves, doubling down to get ahead of that and ensure that we're putting those protections in place. It's our duty.
Indeed. Thank you. So we've explored the challenges that people with learning disabilities can run into in financial services. But how can we make financial services more accessible for all groups? And more importantly, how can fintech help some of these problems?
Brace the rudders! Raise the sails! Raise the sails!
Captain, an unidentified ship is approaching. Over.
Roger. Wait, is that an enterprise sales solution?
Reach sales professionals, not professional sailors. With LinkedIn ads, you can target the right people by industry, job title, and more. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next campaign. Get started today at linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply.
In today's fast-changing digital world, proving your company is trustworthy isn't just important for growth, it's essential. And that's why Vanta is here. Vanta helps companies of all sizes get compliant fast and stay that way with industry-leading AI, automation, and continuous monitoring. So whether you're a startup tackling your first SOC 2 or ISO 27001 or an enterprise manager vendor risk, Vanta's trust management platform makes it quicker, easier, and more scalable. Vanta also helps you complete security questionnaires up to 5 times faster so you can win bigger deals sooner. The results? According to a recent IDC study, Vanta customers slash over $500,000 a year in costs and are 3 times more productive. Establishing trust isn't optional. Vanta makes it automatic. Visit vanta.com/insider to sign up for a free demo today. That's vanta.com/insider.
Welcome back to FinTech Insider Insights, where we're talking about accessibility and making financial services more inclusive for those with learning difficulties. So it'd be great if we can dive into how sort of fintechs and financial technology can tackle financial inclusion or improve financial inclusion for people with disabilities. Now, you were talking earlier about how Project Nemo has been exploring and testing an app that could solve some of these problems. So Joanne and Hannah, perhaps you can tell us a little bit more. Maybe Joanne, you can tell us sort of what you were trying to achieve, and then Hannah, perhaps you can tell us a little bit about what you've done.
Yeah, so to give you the genesis of this to start with, as I said, when I was at GPS, now Thread, I was supporting lots of different challenger banks and fintechs come to life. And a lot of that was in the configurability of the card controls. And so I've got a really good understanding of what I call the art of the possible. And I was very conscious that technology could enable all sorts of features and functionality that I hadn't actually seen explored in the market. So whilst we, in parallel to the research report being underway, I wanted to be able to find a way of fast tracking, coming up with a way of showing what an app could look like. So, and I explored lots of different ways of getting a prototype up and running, and lots of people were generously coming forward with offers and recommendations. But I really wanted to focus exclusively on the customer experience, demonstrating what an app experience could look and feel like, and work, co-create and design with the learning disabilities community such that we could give an example product to MenCap, to other charities, to individuals with lived experience and their family members, to give them an example of what they could be asking for. Because I thought that in many circumstances, they're presented with, well, here's the solution. This is what the local authority is going to provide, or this is what the solution will look like. And they don't know what they could be asking for instead. So that was the thinking behind it. And I came across Hannah's team at CINT, who generously suggested that they would be able to put a delivery scrum team together to actually co-create and produce this art of the possible app to be able to showcase in this same time frame for this same meeting in June. So we literally pulled it together inside a 6-week sprint, which is quite extraordinary. And I guess the final bit that I wanted to say before handing over to Hannah, who can share all the details, is it was important to me that we define this as the art of the possible as opposed to the art of fantasy. And so in order to do so, we worked with a fintech issuer processor called Cloud9. Suresh and team I've known for forever, over a decade. And so we were able to ground the ideas and thinking in their API so that we were able to demonstrate that this is actually, features and functionality that we could choose to put in place today. Over to Hannah.
Perfect. Thank you, Jo. Yes, as Jo said, it was 6 weeks of co-creation from start to finish. So we kicked off with a fantastic workshop where we had people with learning disabilities, their carers, industry experts, all in the room. And we started really wide in that first workshop around what features and pain points the users had and wanted. And then what we came down to effectively was an app experience where there is an app for the person with learning disability, and it is their account, it's the tool to manage their money, but then alongside it, there is an app for their supporter. So that's their trusted third person, their carer. And the whole premise of the app was that the supporter never takes control. They are the guiding hands. They can support, they can nudge, but they never take control without consent. And we had some really fantastic features. So we had this onboarding, which really gets to know the users and understands their condition, the money habits, confidence, any challenges that they have, whether that's cognitive, motor, vision. And that basically created an app that is really adaptable and hyper-personalized. So it can change as your confidence grows or if your abilities decline or indeed improve. And over time, the app will learn about the habits that the user has. So for instance, if the user never uses an ATM and suddenly we see a flurry of ATM activity, we can actually protect the user from that. The emergency pot, so we created an emergency pot. So effectively, there's a bit of money aside to always get home safely or top up your phone so that the user always has that backup of help when perhaps their trusted third person or their carer isn't around. And ultimately, it's all about making sure that the user is empowered. So we did away with some of the features that we saw in the child apps and made sure that the language was really empowering because we wanted to ensure that the user felt that it was their account and they could grow in confidence through using this app.
Sounds fantastic. Jo made the very good point earlier that sometimes when you're trying to make things more accessible for one group, you come up with features or functions that are good for everybody. And some of the things you were saying, like the emergency get home safe pot, sounds like something that lots of people would benefit from. Kat, from your perspective, and maybe not speaking for Nationwide because that's a little bit unfair perhaps, but what kinds of things do you think banks, insurance companies, investment management firms and so on should be doing to try and start incorporating some of these ideas into the products and services that they deliver to their customers? I mean, what as in your ambassador sort of role, what are you hoping to see the industry doing?
I'm so pleased that they're doing the first thing, which is listening, because in the room we had fintechs, we had high street banks, we had regulators, we had charities, we had people with lived experience. Everybody was there to see the demo and to see the insights in the report. So that they've already started. What we now need them to do is take this wonderful report. It provides so much insight around the everyday experiences of users and their trusted third parties, not just around spending, but around banking more broadly. But then it really sets out the sorts of features and functionality that they should be user testing. Of course, all the different providers will have different products and services, so it needs to be customized to their own organizations. But there's so much in here to take away. And it was wonderful to see these insights come off the page and come alive in the CI&T demo on the day. But for firms, they've got a 40-page manual here from where to get started. But crucially, don't let that engagement with the disabled community end. You've really got to involve people. Hannah and the team did it. They were right in the mix there as they co-created these solutions. There's a very, very important phrase in the disability community: nothing about us without us, which means making sure that they have a seat at the table, their voices are being heard, and you continue to do that throughout every stage of the design, and you will get a better product as a result. I guarantee it.
To add to that, it's worth just reflecting on the value of what we did. We had 4 work streams running in parallel. And it's worth just reflecting on the work that we did with Workstream 3, which was to effectively scan the market to understand solutions, particularly fintech solutions, that are out there today. And they fell into 2 camps. One is B2C solutions that are there for the consumer that are maybe, that just haven't had the profile, don't have the visibility. And, the learning disability community and their carers and loved ones just weren't aware that they existed. So we've been able to identify a number of those organizations, and we're now working towards actually sort of providing exposure to those companies to across this community. And secondly, B2B solutions. So there are a number of fintechs, as many fintechs are, they're looking to help provide solutions to banks to help sort of solve some of these specific issues. So again, we've identified a number, and we're looking to share those details with banks and other financial institutions so that they can potentially benefit or learn what options are out there to be able to support them in servicing these broader needs.
Thank you. Hannah, were there any features that you were developing that sort of performed really well in testing? I don't know if you managed to get testing. It was a very short window you had to develop it. Or any sort of features or that surprised you or pleased you or that you were sort of really passionate about? Are there 2 or 3 things that you sort of want to highlight to listeners?
I think probably the help. So we put help at the heart of the app. So at the bottom of the app, there's a big, really visible help button. And within help, there is a calm feature. So we know that there is a lot of anxiety around money for people with learning disabilities. So calm mode, when they've had a transaction declined or perhaps a fraud alert, they can activate calm mode, and it strips back the UI and just makes everything really simple and helps guide the user to resolution. Savings pots were a really positive feature that the community loves. So being able to save for something special, but see that pot grow and then ultimately treat yourself to whatever it is. In testing, we had a big Lady Gaga fan, so being able to save for her Lady Gaga tickets. And to go with the savings pots, probably the spending simulation. So we heard a lot in the early rounds around checkout anxiety and not knowing the impact of what was going to happen at the checkouts on their finances. So we created a tool where the user can put in what they want to spend, £50 perhaps, and it will guide them. Yes, you can spend £50, but this is the impact it's going to have on your finances for the rest of the month or your savings goals, and suggest alternatives. So, maybe not spend £50. If you spend 30, you're still going to meet your savings goals on time.
Fabulous. Catherine, I just want to take this down to a slightly different topic of regulation. And I know regulation isn't the answer to everything, but does there need to be sort of a little bit more regulation here, do you think, to sort of promote more inclusion and accessibility? Or is a lot of this sort of encompassed within existing guidance in the UK, like treating customers fairly and so on? Is this something that regulators either in the UK or more widely should be sort of doing more? Or is the regulation there and it's just there hasn't been enough creativity and innovation to solve these problems better?
Regulation is one thing, but in the UK, we've got the Equality Act 2010, which sets this out really well. It sets out the legal framework that requires companies to anticipate the reasonable access needs and provide for them. And these are all reasonable, and they're especially reasonable and foreseeable now because they're in our report, which is great. It's really clear that legal mandate is there. However, the downside is that it often falls to the individuals to call out where they face barriers. This means that exclusion can happen, but companies aren't always held to account unless the customer takes action. And if you're excluded on a daily basis up and down the high street at every junction, you're not going to have the energy to fight for all of that exclusion. So unfortunately, we don't see greater adoption of accessibility by companies and organisations as we could. So I think that's a really important point. And it's sometimes it's this policy practice gap between we've got the legal framework, the regulators are very clear. The FCA states that the Equality Act, must be met to meet the vulnerable customer guidance, but it does unfortunately fall to the consumer to kind of call it out where they're not getting that. And secondly, with regards to the regulatory framework, on the topic of learning disability and provision for those with limited mental capacity, which is obviously what this topic is about, this was a key theme identified back in December at the original December roundtable. Firms called out that there was a perceived lack of clarity about what they could do to best support these users. So Project Nemo stood up and led a work stream on that very topic, sponsored by Fox Williams, who have been absolutely fantastic. And we've done some great work to map the legal and regulatory landscape, which is really complex in this space. And we've actually just published some early insights on that market legal and regulatory scan that's published on the Project Nemo website. So obviously this is a complex topic and work continues on this work stream. So there's more to come in that space.
Wonderful. So Jo, you and the Project Nemo team and indeed Camp Hannah have done this fantastic work shining a light onto learning disabilities and how financial services firms can help people with learning disabilities. What's next? Promoting more of this, pushing this harder, looking into other areas of disability. What's sort of next on your radar?
So for this learning disabilities project specifically, the next actions are primarily going to be within organisations. It's an industry response. We've provided the research and insights. We've provided sort of that assessment of the regulatory landscape, the assessment of the landscape in terms of existing service provision. We've shown the art of the possible, and now we really need organisations to pick up the mantle, read our research and dig in and understand this more and take action. And we are really, really pleased by the number of organisations that we can see already have reached out to us. Obviously that starts to be things that are behind the scenes as opposed to things we can explicitly talk about. But we know we've been working across Catherine's peer groups. The head of vulnerabilities of many of the banks have been involved. Many fintechs and the challenger banks are involved. And they're genuinely taking this seriously. And, some of the first steps that could be done to implement some of these features and functionality are not a million miles away. One or two tech sprints, accessibility sprints, and you could start to bring these kind of features to life that would benefit lots of people for lots of reasons. You don't have to say, right, this is only available to a certain community. For Project Nemo more broadly, I set it about as a 12-month initiative. I'm now in month 14. But we are looking to consolidate all of the learnings, all of the insights, the various frameworks that we've come across, the companies that can support organisations, and start to document that in a format that can persist. And if anyone is interested in leaning in and supporting us with that in any way, whether it's financial, whether it's contribution in writing or other forms, then always happy to hear from people. This, Project Nemo has existed and persisted through the great gift of people leaning in.
Amazing. So as we wrap up, could I ask each of you to sort of say one thing to our listeners, one thing you think our listeners could and should be doing to help make financial services more accessible? Hannah, what's one thing you think our listeners could and should be doing today?
I think really making sure that inclusion is a mindset and not a checklist, and to ensure that you've got people with lived experience throughout your processes. It's not just something to do at the beginning or at the end. And, really looking at who you're testing with. I think a lot of people will say, great, we test our apps, but who are you testing with? Have you got real representation in your testing of what you're building?
Fantastic. Catherine?
That inclusive and accessible tech is key, but not everything can be solved by tech. Nationwide, we call this our high-tech, low-tech, no-tech approach, that sometimes it's great to have services in good old-fashioned analog alongside innovative tech solutions as well.
And Jo?
I think you don't know what you don't know. And, that can be forgiven when you're just not thinking about it. But if you were to watch our Project Nemo film series of 6 stories of 6 individuals, different disabilities, different lived experiences, and their pain points in financial services, I guarantee that every person in our industry could watch between those 6 films, pick something up and think, I'd never thought of that before. And actually, once you start leaning in, it's that journey from unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence. When you start to think, I never thought about that, you start on a journey and then you start unpicking and learning. And it's a journey that doesn't stop because there's, still more and more to learn. But honestly, it's the most rewarding journey. It's the most rewarding experience I've ever had in my life.
Well, that brings us to the section about where people can learn more about each of you. So, Jo, maybe you can go first. Where can people find out more about Project Nemo? Where can they find those videos you just mentioned? Where can they find the report?
Yeah, so the report, the videos, all our assets are on the projectnemo.co.uk website. We're active on LinkedIn, as am I, Joanne Dewar. Thank you.
Catherine, where can people find out more about you and your work?
LinkedIn for me too, please. It's Catherine Townsend, Catherine with a K. And for everything that Nationwide is doing, of which there is a lot that we've not had a chance to cover today, nationwide.co.uk.
And Hannah, where can people find out more about you and about CINT?
I'm going to say same again. LinkedIn, Hannah Darley, or you can connect with CINT and find out more about all of our work and with Project Nemo. If anyone wants to try the prototype or learn how to bring lived experience into their own product development, just reach out. We'd love to help.
And as for me, Benjamin Ensor, you can find me on LinkedIn. The 3 of you have been an absolute delight to talk to, but more importantly, you've shone a light onto a really important topic. You've done some fabulous and really important work. So a massive thank you to the 3 of you for taking part today. Listeners, please, I hope this has motivated you to dig into this and learn more. If you want to join the conversation, seek us out on social media. Just search for 11FS or FinTech Insider. So thank you so much to my 3 panelists. Thank you to all of you for listening, and goodbye.
In today's fast-changing digital world, proving your company is trustworthy isn't just important for growth, it's essential. And that's why Vanta is here. Vanta helps companies of all sizes get compliant fast and stay that way with industry-leading AI, automation, and continuous monitoring. So whether you're a startup tackling your first SOC 2 or ISO 27001 or an enterprise manager vendor risk, Vanta's trust management platform makes it quicker, easier, and more scalable. Vanta also helps you complete security questionnaires up to 5 times faster so you can win bigger deals sooner. The results? According to a recent IDC study, Vanta customers slash over $500,000 a year in costs and are 3 times more productive. Establishing trust isn't optional. Vanta makes it automatic. Visit vanta.com/insider to sign up for a free demo today. That's VANTA.com/insider.